we have to be really clear about it. Like, how are we weighting those things? How are we honoring the desires of the employees in terms of where they want to work? At the same time, how are we responding to the significant student needs in a way that we're charged with? So like I said, there are no easy solutions, but to me, the way forward with anything like this is engaging and talking about it and looking at all the different aspects of it and having a clear understanding together as we, monstrous air quotes, kind of leave the pandemic, again, monstrous air quotes, right?
Yeah.
But as we hopefully are transitioning to what we thought we were doing last summer, how, as we move forward, everybody having a clear understanding about that, so that feeling, it remains intact, trust remains intact, and we are working together as a single community. So I just wanted to share that's something that we're working on and talking about, and I think we'll continue to be talking about, because we don't think that the staff shortage is going to be ending by June. We think we're going to be starting the school year with some of these same challenges. And we want to be prepared and ready and as I said, together as much as possible. The final thing I just wanted to mention, our advisory committee is meeting next week. We've got 2 meetings in May and then a meeting in June. And they're working on, as I have mentioned, gathering data, and we'll be working on recommendations as they look at kind of high level what they're seeing from across ACSD. That will then be coming to the board in August. So that's the update.
Steve?
Yeah,
And then Barb.
okay. So we recently, new board members went around and talked to administrators, and I just have to say, I was so impressed with how much the administrators were pitching in the classroom and doing, what needed to be done. And I would be remiss if I did not extend huge kudos to you. I have never worked in a district where the superintendent has gone and substituted in a room. That's massive. So thank you for doing that. And I know this is a special situation, but it speaks volumes about your willingness to pitch in. I really have to commend you on that. So.
Barb, then Peter, then Joe.
Okay, I had asked this last week, or last 2 weeks ago. Is the teaching contracts, when are those due? So have we got all those back at this point, so we know?
We don't have them all back yet, and they're due at the end of this week, and then, and so people can request also an extension. So we do generally provide an extension if someone's, looking at another position or they're wondering what they're going to do. We have offered some extensions. So oftentimes by mid-May is generally kind of where we really know kind of where things are. The concerns I have around staffing are not necessarily our teaching positions going into next year. So far, in terms of the positions that we've posted for next year, we've gotten, I think, pretty good pools of applicants. It's more of the support positions, I think, that are ones that fill later. There's a lot of turnover generally in those positions. And those are the ones that I think are going to be harder to fill going into next year. Along with the ones like, special educators are statewide and probably a nationwide challenge to fill. And speech language pathologists, which we've talked about here before too.
Peter?
I just, while you were discussing this, I pulled up School Spring to see how many jobs were open in Vermont. 1,936 positions. I mean, this is what we're up against in an area, and really a state that has no housing for anybody to move into. I mean, this is going to be a major challenge.
I talked to a teacher who's moving here from Montpelier, and she was saying she's actually building a house here, and she's gonna have to rent for a year. So she said, I have no idea what I'm gonna do because I've been looking and looking and I can't find anything.
Childcare is a problem too.
Chip?
It's a huge problem.
I just, my comment was more, how systemic it is, and obviously it is systemic, just it's throughout everything in education at this point, especially in Paris. But when you say talk about it, I mean, you're telling us, and obviously that's the frustrations of trying to find it, but I guess I don't know what you mean by that. Is that something you
Relative to
talk
what?
about when you sign the contract and say you realize you may be going to Shoreham for a day if we can't find somebody to do that? Now, obviously, that isn't necessarily in their contract, but is that what you mean a little bit? I guess I'm a
No,
little
it's
confused as
more-
whether you talk about it beforehand or talk about it after the fact to try to console them for that disruption and what they expected to be doing.
There have been a couple of different reasons why we've had to move people. So generally, it's not good practice to be moving people around a lot because it's unsettling, right? For a number of different reasons. And that's true of administrators, it's true of teachers, it's true of I think, in general, that's true. There obviously are times when you have a position that you need to fill where there's, you need to do that. The times that we've had to make these moves have been when there's been a reduction in force. So last year and the year before that we had one reduction in force, I think, and then last year we had a number. It turned out after the whole hiring process, they weren't reductions because we had to rehire back. But due to the contract timeline, which is like January, where we have to let people know about RIF, we had to go through that process and we had to reassign because we had fewer positions than teachers at that time in January. So we had to go about reassigning. So that was that's one time. When we had to put together the remote academy in the kind of the first full year of the pandemic, we had to find and put together a team of elementary teachers to teach the remote academy. So that was another time that we had to do that. And that's generally kind of when it's happened, is that reduction in force or something like this, or when there has been vacant positions. We had a vacant position in Shoreham, and we needed to move someone not in a teaching position into that position to fill that.
It's difficult.
Whoops.
Yeah. And our intention, like I said, our intention is to keep people in their building, and, you grow a community in a building and you want to stay there, and it's, you don't want to engage in those processes. Sometimes you have to.
Can I make one more comment? I think the public has to understand this also. Not that they will necessarily be more patient, so to speak, because if it's your kid that's getting disrupted or how it affects you as the family of your student. But it's still a really important deal that it's not just the fact that we didn't fund it correctly or we didn't do this correctly or whatever. This is a problem across education. And how do we encourage Paris, people of that level to get involved in education? Not just here, but at Burlington or CVU or Bennington, I don't know, but I'm sure it's the same thing. I don't know. I feel very frustrated that at times some of what the system gets criticized for, which is right to criticize in some ways, but are things which are not really very controllable by us. If people don't apply for a job, that job goes on, and you either have to define the system or something. I don't know.
I think so.
Bigger classes, all those kinds of things, which are not what we want to do, but yet.
We're in a very different context. So, I mean, I think if you look historically at our community and you look at our history, up to 6 years ago, teachers were in their own district. And now they're in a larger district. So if you go to a district, I mean, I came from a district in Oregon that was slightly larger than this, but it had been a single district for a long time, right? So these processes were known by people, they were understood by people, and there was a different culture around it. We're coming from a culture where, as I said, individual districts, there was no movement at all. So that's part of the learning that we're trying to do at the central office right now, is leaning in to talk with our principals and with teachers to better understand how do we, as a community, how do we do this? Like, if there's a need to do this, how do we do this in a way that is the most respectful, is the most beneficial for all? And in some of these realities, it's hard to get to 100% where there's total agreement on what should happen is sometimes pretty challenging when you're talking about some of these issues that we have to deal with.
Joanna, you ready to hand up and then Mary Helen?
Three things. Do you anticipate maybe using your May grounding visits in the schools to have some of these conversations?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I had a couple of clarifying questions. Like Peter, I pulled up our own internal employment opportunities, and I see familiar things on it. I don't see what you referenced earlier with the Shoreham teacher is not posted here, and correct me if I'm wrong. And also, how many of these are sort of new positions? Like, a lot are familiar, but like the school nutrition assistant and the school nutrition manager it's not that familiar to me. So are they currently, they're held their position and they're being carried over next year, or are those new positions?
So those aren't new. The school nutrition, we just took on school nutrition recently, right? So we are now in-house as opposed to Abbey Group, which was a contractor that came in. So those positions are related to having our own school nutrition.
So that's turnover from this year to next year.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just the disconnect between seeing these positions posted and then knowing we have a need that you mentioned earlier and not seeing it posted.
Can I speak to the Shoreham one?
Sure.
That was the position that was vacated very early in the fall. We tried to hire a long-term sub, and we pieced it together for about a month, and then we gave up the search for a long-term sub and we did an internal reassignment.
Okay.
So it's no longer posted because we've solved it for this school year. And once we solved it for the school year, that was one of those painful reassignments. And we made another painful decision to carry that decision through the end of the school year to give the students fewer disruptions, fewer transitions.
But there will be a need next year.
Oh, yes. There,
So there,
yeah, we are I know our principals are in the process of hiring classroom teachers collaboratively. So we have postings for classroom teachers and our principals go through that process together. So you might not, I don't know if there's one explicitly posted for Shoreham, but we're definitely
I see
filling.
I see the Shoreham principal posted, but nothing.
Oh, no, the classroom teachers too. I'm not sure exactly where that process is. The principals lead it.
Right, so.
I think they're on the other end of that, actually.
I think they've addressed all of the current
Yeah.
openings at this point.
Of classroom teachers?
Yeah.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's why I was saying, I
Yeah.
think,
So that it's
I think the bigger issue is gonna be
Yeah, our support staff.
Support staff.
Mary Helen and then Barb.
Question for you, Peter. Can you talk about like the positions that you indicated sort of more concern about being able to fill and keep, maintain positions for paras as opposed to, or specialists of
Right,
paras
right,
as opposed
right.
to classroom teachers. Can you talk a little bit about the degree to which those positions are shared between different buildings?
Like paraprofessional.
Yeah, and whether that is a factor in the turnover?
I don't think so. We don't have that many paraprofessional positions that are shared. Most of them are either part-time within a building or full-time within a building.
Okay.
Most of our shared positions are teaching staff in our smaller elementary schools.
So we approved the new additions a staff and who was a Shoreham teacher, is that fill the position? Because there's only a para and the principal that's listed.
You mean on
On
School Spring?
Yeah, on School Spring. That's
Yeah,
what-
we haven't formalized some of these. I'm meeting with, I've got a stack of applications that they meet with me after they're approved by the hiring committee. So I think they're in line for this week.
Are there any more questions or comments for Dr. Burrows? Guess not. Thank you.
Could we get a student update?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, great. I think we got some lacrosse games going on right now at the high school, actually. So, I can speak mostly to the high school. I know a couple of the kids at the middle school, and there's definitely, I think there have been a lot of improvement, which is kind of incredible if you think where we were, I think just before Thanksgiving break, where things were at where it's worse. I think there's a real sense of like improvement. Of course, there's still like work that needs to be done there. It doesn't all kind of change that quickly. I'm really looking forward to, and we're starting to prepare in the high school for the Peer Leaders program. So welcoming the freshmen from the 8th grade over to the high school, which I think it'll go well, especially because we have a really large group of peer leaders this year, around 60. Which might be, a little bit necessary for the class we have coming in, but I think that'll be really good. In terms of, I think the school year is winding down, but I think in terms of the DP program and everything, it's been a bit difficult. And I think if you were, I don't know if any of you know about, there was a kind of a meeting arranged for those in the program with the DP coordinator, and I think that's going a bit difficult. I think there are, especially with the extra projects outside of school, I think a lot of that isn't being completed, and not necessarily because of the students all the time. But other than that, we're doing great, yeah. Just gotta get through the next month and a half.
7 weeks, someone said to me.
Yeah.
Question about the DP. Do you feel that, and I guess, just in full transparency, I had a senior who has gone through the program and is graduating from it, and has her opinions about it. But do you think it's a communication concern, or what? How would you characterize the difficulty?
Again, I think, well, actually, there's one person who's been really helpful. Our extended essay coordinator, Ms. Slater, is just wonderful. A lot of communication there, and I think that's why she's been so effective. But I think, again, there's the DP coordinator this year is part-time, so there's only so much you can do in that position. But I think there is all the same, I think there's more that could be done. I feel like sometimes there's communication, but it's not necessarily in the right places. And I think, when we speak about transitioning out of transitioning to more a normal state of learning, I think that also has to come with, less stuff being done over email, less stuff being done over Zoom, and more of it being in person in school, so students can interact with that support system. Because I think it's, it's easy enough to just shoot off an email into the blue, but I think that face-to-face coordination is really.
And just one other question for you, Peter. Do you, what is the plan? Is Mums going to be having a graduation ceremony? Are they going to be celebrating that? Folks over there don't seem to know. What I've been
Michael about it, and thus far, he was talking about where it would be, and there's a committee there talking about it.
Okay, good.
He said he talked to the committee, and they were asking about whether they would do it again at the arena or do it in-house. The reason we moved to the arena previously was because, one, it's already set up.
Right.
There was coordination and,
Yeah.
we
So much
kind of had the idea recently of allowing Mary Hogan and moms to use it and have the high school kind of set up graduation, and then it's kind of there for the other schools to use too. I think they were talking potentially about doing it at Mom's, but a decision hadn't been made yet, so I need to loop back with them and see where they are in the process. But they're definitely going to do it, they're
Okay.
talking about it.
I hope it'll get on the calendar soon because people are wondering.
Oh, yeah, my sister's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is good for me to know.
Yeah.
I will follow up.
But ending it with spring sports season here, so make sure to come out and support the local teams. The lacrosse game's happening today at home, and then the girls happening Friday home, I think. And also some just high school stuff. There was $2,000 raised by SCORE and National Honor Society to donate to Ukraine, so we're really proud of that. The community really came together, especially if any of you went to the senior musical. And there were donations collected there. So yeah.
That was the high school and there was a middle school
Yeah,
collection as well.
yeah. So
I think
really,
they raised about the same amount.
Yeah.
really great to see. And all of it's going to Amnesty International.
That's so great. Anybody have any other questions for any of our presenters today?
No, but I feel justified for being 10 minutes late because I was supporting the lacrosse game. I was putting my support into action. I couldn't get myself away fast enough to be here on time.
That's fine, thank you. Report of the board, discussion board retreat.
My husband got himself penalty as the coach.
I went online to see what the board retreat had up there and it said nothing yet, so I don't know what we should report on it, other than it's Thursday from 3:30 to 7. And it's here, right?
It's here.
It's
and
here.
Dinner's being served
And we have a
from our
consultant.
food service.
When can we expect an agenda for it?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
I think Sharon, I thought Sharon posted it today. The agenda's board training.
Board training.
It's not a complicated agenda.
No, there wasn't. I know when I went to board pack earlier today, it just said that there was no information present or something like that.
Meeting content is not available.
There we go.
I talked to Sharon about it this morning, and she was posting it, so I'm not sure why it's not up there, but I'll follow up in the morning.
But we do have a facilitator.
Yes.
We do, yeah.
Barb?
And it's also not on the community calendar. So it is a meeting that needs to be warned.
You know, she was gonna warn it today, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure why it's not warned.
Oh, okay.
I'll follow up with her.
Steve?
Okay, so it says board training, and that's a little nebulous, like weird into being trained. But I think there are also some issues that we need to discuss, like how we function as a board, that I've mentioned a couple of times, and it's kind of been, gee, that's something we should really talk about at the board retreat. And so I'm not really sure, should that kind of stuff be on the agenda, or or should we trust that that stuff is gonna get brought up and talked about, I guess is my question.
Can you clarify what you mean by that stuff?
So there's a couple of different things. One was the board's interaction with school personnel, specifically teachers and administrators. And another one is not necessarily the board's role, but I mean, I think you're going to be covering that in the training stuff. But I'd rather not say about the other things, because if they're not on the agenda, I don't want to.
You don't want to stir a pot?
I want to stir a pot,
Okay.
yeah. So,
And I believe from the brief conversations that I've heard about the training, it's, how does the board function, what the board's roles are, and its responsibilities, how do we interact with board members, with staff, with administration. So I'm thinking, from what I've heard, that what your concerns are will be covered. But I mean, normally,
yeah.
At least some of the board retreats that I've been in, and sometimes there's not a, line item by line item agenda. it says board retreat and board training, and then when the speaker shows up, they have everything all set to go.
And that's what I'm a little afraid of, is that if we're running through a package that runs for 3.5 hours, do we have an opportunity to talk some of these issues that I think need to be discussed as a board? And if we don't do it at the retreat, we definitely need to do it in a meeting like this. And how do we get those on the,
I think those are,
Yeah, my understanding from the trainer, I mean, she's got kind of open space in this training to kind of go over the kind of classic roles and responsibilities and, how do you operate as a board, kind of a la VSBA, and has space to kind of bring the group together in terms of anything that I think anyone on the board wants to raise in terms of who are we, how do we operate.
I mean, for example, this afternoon, there was a mandatory board chair superintendent training that I listened to. I was driving through most of it, so I obviously couldn't chat with them when they said, please chat now. But a lot of it was, going over the same, board roles, how the chair would interact with the superintendent, how a chair can help lead a board in different roles. Spoke a lot about trust and the building of trust within a board. Talked a lot about engaging board members and what a board's role should be as far as within a district. So I'm thinking that, the trainer has already heard from Victoria about some issues and some things that we need to work on. So I'm thinking that it'll probably be all in there.
okay,
If not, raise your hand.
Okay.
When there's a question, comment in question time saying, I'm struggling with this. Always best to put it on yourself and, it's my issue. I'm dealing with it or struggling with it. Maybe not everyone else is, but this is what I'm struggling with and can we talk about it?
well, I'm a bit of a shrinking violet, so I'm gonna have trouble.
Thinking back.
Mary Heather, was that your hand up?
Yeah, I
or
was just
your
gonna
pen?
follow up, I mean, I was just remembering too that Victoria had forwarded an email with, just again, kind of here's an example of some questions that have come up, particularly around public comments and our ability as a board to respond or not respond. And so I think that's, again, stuff that will be covered in training or that we can bring up as a specific example. Okay, what about this situation? So I expect that's probably kind of in the back pocket there to pull out as well, so.
Is that okay, Steve? Or
Yeah, no,
Or would you like us to forward some very specific things to the trainer, facilitator, and
I'll be happy to create a list and pass it on to Victoria, and you guys can look at it and decide what's valuable and what's not valuable, but I really don't want to take time here.
Right, yeah.
And I've been to the board trainings, they are incredibly valuable. They do cover some of the issues that we're talking about, but there are some things that, how do we do it here as a board that I think we kind of need to address. And it's all well and good to hear what VSBA says is the right answer, but I think we have a couple of cases that we do need to discuss.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay.
Chip?
I think we have I would hope we would have some flexibility during the retreat, because it's usually not as formal as having agenda items. Yes, there are issues, but I think this whole role of the board covers a huge spectrum here. So whether it's how we function in a meeting like this, how we function in the public, with the public in a meeting like this, how we function with our employees and faculty and everything else in whatever way we're doing. So those are really important. They seem to run in cycles as to how things happen, but I think it's a really important topic, and it's very broad. So I'm totally with you. I mean, if we're not hearing what we want to be discussing, so that we come out of it, at least all of us having, we may not always agree, but at least come out of it with what's going to be our pattern of performance.
And that was one thing, I'm so glad you brought that up, the VSBA training this afternoon, they did talk about how boards could work together and realize that you may not always agree.
Right.
But how to disagree amicably and come to an agreement or, an answer and move on from there. But it was a very interesting training. I did tell someone earlier on that the gentleman that did it is fresh from Texas. So he has some very large ideas that might not fit the small state of Vermont, but it was refreshing to hear a different point of view. Barb?
Yeah, who's doing the training for us on Thursday?
Jackie Wilson.
Is she from School Board Association or is
She doesn't work for the School Board Association, but she does a lot of work for the School Board Association.
Thank you.
She's kind of one of the main trainers out there right now, so.
Anything else about board retreat? And there is also no longer a conflict with the Career Center. We moved that meeting, so.
Yeah.
That meeting has been moved. If there's nothing else about the,
So, not about board retreat.
okay. I was gonna ask if there was anything for other. Is that what your finger was going?
Just really for you and Steve more than anybody else. We need, at some point, I assume we need to appoint another at-large person for the Career Center Board, a community person. Oh, because I thought Nick would potentially,
Nick, is staying.
Okay.
He was appointed last year, so
yeah. There was rumors that he might retire from it.
So we don't need to.
No.
Great.
Not at
Thank
this
you.
point.
Although we just recently did have a new person join the board,
Yes,
which I'm very excited about.
We did appoint a new workforce person. It's Dr. Love from Porter Hospital. And her resume, easily 15 pages in length and more initials after her name than, I don't know, even though the workforce people were impressed by the number of initials behind her name and they're like, wow, she's impressive, but she brings a wealth of experience. She's moved around the US, she's served in a lot of different roles. And she's really excited to dig in and see how she can help, so.
Great.
Be good to have her. Anything else for other? Heather?
I guess I just have a question whether or not we can have a quick little, committee, update. Have all the committees met since we've reshuffled things, or is?
No.
No.
We've not, okay. So, no.
But finance is meeting Wednesday after facilities is meeting here, because there's some two of us are on both committees. So it made sense to follow one with the other. So both of those are meeting. So I don't believe facilities has met since then. So there has to be some reorganization
Yeah.
takes place in both of those.
You're gonna be here all day on Wednesday.
Hmm?
So for her all day. Oh, well, Wednesday and Thursday, I was thinking the retreat
No, it's just an hour.
for each.
I was just saying, the policy committee did meet after the election, so we had 2 meetings in March, none in April, but we'll meet again in May. So.
Which is in a few days.
No, but it's the end, we're going back to our third week, third Wednesday of the week, so. Vacation kind of changed things up a little bit for April.
Okay. The Communications and Engagement Committee has met one time since shuffling. And we're just kind of setting priorities. And I guess, I'm trying to think, we were talking about kind of elevating to look into a little bit how we could improve engagement, public engagement, how that might look, maybe do a little research about how other school districts are doing it and just kind of figure out best practices, see if we can identify some best practices for that. Also, communication and engagement around the facilities master plan report when that handoff happens. And I guess the other thing I would just plant the seed for the board to think about is communication and engagement with teachers as another sort of group of stakeholders in our district, and how that can be done, with the full board, how that can be done in a transparent, meaningful way. So I think that's just another thing our committee wants to work on, so. And that's it.
Thank you. Peter?
Just one more thing, since at our last meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about pupil weighting and what's going to happen. So the bill has not passed, but both the House and the Senate have put forth bills that do stick with weights over payments, and which, if you remember, one affected us a little more than the other. This affects us less. Still affects us negatively, but less so than payments.
Are we going to see that by the end of the session?
Yes.
Okay.
Peter, on that end, do you know where the, and I heard this just as I drove in and parked my car, but they were talking again about the money for school lunches for everyone. Do you know where that is?
That should be passed out of the House in the first couple of days of this week, I imagine. Yeah, and then it's on to the Senate, and then we get into discussions over PCBs and food. So, but there's a lot. There's about $100 million sitting in surplus on the education fund. So, in a way, we can set aside money for PCB mitigation if necessary, and fund school meals for the year, and return money to taxpayers. So,
But nothing for career tech ed centers.
There's some money. There's about $1.3 million.
And there's how many career tech centers?
Just a question for Peter. I thought the governor originally had wanted to use half of that for career centers.
So that proposal was one sentence in a budget address that never amounted to anything more than that.
Okay. Well,
And we asked about it, and the response was, "Oh, we were waiting for you to come up with a proposal."
okay.
Okay.
Well, I tell you, infrastructure for schools, whether it's PCB related, God help us. I mean, I don't know.
Infrastructure will be probably topic number one in the next session.
Yeah, because it's
I
been
hope
so
so,
long
because you can't have one district wanting to build a $200 and something million. I understand why they have to do it, but.
Well, and then we've got the school that has no school.
Right.
At
Yeah.
$200 million or plus.
Yeah.
No, it's, it is amazing when you look at the numbers, what's needed, but also what everything is costing. I mean, just in Cornwall, our salt shed was budgeted for $200,000 and the estimates came in at $900,000. This is a tented hoop salt shed,
Oh my
no
gosh.
infrastructure. It's just crazy right now, crazy.
Same material, just the
No,
price.
no, it's the shed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
the
shed.
building of it.
Yeah.
I mean, 2x4s is
Well,
5 times as
cost of
expensive.
materials, cost of materials.
Right, but the,
you sort of add that to the long list of gloom and doom in front of us, and it's a little hard to stomach sometimes. Staff shortages, and that's, we're not climbing out of that in a while.
no, and it's not just schools, it's everyone.
Can I just follow up with a question? This is specific about the PCB testing, but is that something that is required or will be required?
It is required. So this was something that in the world of politics was sort of thrown in by those who had an interest in this at the end of last year, before a lot of deep discussion could take place about it. And so it is required. There's money for funding the testing. The testing hopefully will be delayed a couple of years as they get a good program together. I mean, it's a little, we will be the first state to take on PCB testing.
Right, yeah.
And in this era, as one of my colleagues said, are we really in search of another reason to kick kids out of the classroom?
Right.
So it's,
On the news.
it's a little frustrating. But now that it is going forward, so now we need to make sure that schools can feel confident that if something is found, that there'll be some state assistance to
Yeah,
help mitigate the problem.
yeah. I mean,
The
I could
issue
just,
is, I mean, I'm connected to this too,
okay.
and they are extending the timeline. I haven't heard them, they're extending the amount of time,
Exactly. That's exactly right. They're
Not the
not
start of it.
delaying the start of the program.
and they are pinpointing, they are prioritizing, and I don't believe we're on the prioritized list, which is good.
Hard to imagine.
They've already contacted the prioritized districts that have a building that there is going to be in the first run, in the first year, I think it is. The challenge that we're talking about in terms of the funding, if PCBs are found, and you look at what happened in Burlington, you could set aside $100 million. That's one district. That's one building.
School in the Macy's?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, if you take Burlington aside, there was a pilot project a few years ago, and no, in high likelihood schools, and, no excessive levels of PCBs were found. So we, hopefully Burlington was a bit of an anomaly. The safe level has changed. But, it's not necessarily, well, never mind.
I mean, it's just a real challenge.
It's a little frustrating.
Yeah.
Piece of-
Chip, and then
When
Barb.
we did the renovations on the high school, Peter may remember, we had 7 different contracts for asbestos
Yeah,
abatement,
I remember
7.
Yeah.
And this was mostly because of flooring or other things which were only going to be disturbed when no one was there, but you had to spend thousands and thousands of dollars in order to even tear up the tile. So, I mean, and this is obviously, that's if you're breathing it down on the floor.
Yeah, right.
So it's a little frightening, honestly, terribly frightening. I just cringe at the thought of, my God, what happens if you find things, so.
Yeah.
Not that we
Yeah.
should look, but.
So just to follow up from what I heard Peter say, that we're not on the first priority list, which is good, but how did they determine do they already have a sense?
Age of school.
Age of schools?
Yeah.
Okay.
Certain grants and tax abilities are available.
1960 to 1980 is really the main target time.
But we have quite a few schools that were in that range,
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
including in our district.
Mhm.
Scary.
Well, and speaking of the tiles, the career centers
Yeah.
will be taking up asbestos.
Yeah.
So,
Scary.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
This house is
Hey,
spring.
All right.
Not all boards have an education committee person on the board, so we're tapping Peter for a little of this sort of
extra information.
stuff.
Christmas, just, I guess.
Yeah, we have no.
You can go to the,
I move we
Go to
adjourn.
standard register.
They just sold that, I think,
Yeah.
someone's using
We
it.
have a motion on the floor.
Yeah, marijuana.
I move we adjourn.
Okay, the motion to adjourn, second?
Second.
I'm presuming all are in favor?
Yes.
Yeah. Does anyone want to abstain or say no? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Joanna.
Great.